Greetings, I'm Ed Steinfeld, the director of the Watson Institute for International and Public Affairs at Brown University. Welcome to our special webinar today, Insights from the Campaign Trail, a conversation with Andrew Yang and Tom Perez. Before I formally welcome our guests today, let me just say a word about the format for today's 60-minute webinar. After my brief introduction, Andrew and Tom will have a discussion for about 25 minutes, and then they'll take questions from students. Because we have over 600 people participating today, we've asked students to submit questions in advance, and then we've selected a number of the students to ask their questions on camera. We'll try to take as many questions as possible. And now, let me introduce our guests. Andrew Yang, Brown class of 1996, is a successful business entrepreneur, the founder of the nonprofit organization Venture for America, and a designee by the Obama administration as a champion of change and a presidential ambassador for global entrepreneurship. Most recently, of course, Andrew ran as a candidate in the 2020 presidential race on the Democratic Party side. That candidacy in many ways has shifted the discourse in the United States and frankly continues to do so today in the midst of our current public health challenges. Tom Perez, Brown class of 1983, is the chair of the Democratic National Committee. Previously, during the Obama administration, Tom had served as the 26th United States Secretary of Labor, and prior to that as Assistant Attorney General in the US Department of Justice, where he headed up the Civil Rights Division. We're very fortunate at Brown to have Tom on our faculty at the Watson Institute as a Senior Fellow. Tom, Andrew, let me turn it over to you. Thanks.
Thank you, Professor Steinfeld. It's great to see you again, and good afternoon to all of the students. And thank you, Andrew, for joining us. This is a really exciting afternoon for me, and I also think for Andrew. And so we're going to jump right in. What I'm going to do is ask Andrew a few questions, first of all about his Brown experience, and then jump into some of his experiences on the presidential campaign. And then we're going to throw it open to you for questions. Can't wait to hear your questions. It's always an honor for both of us to be back at Brown with so many students. So let's jump right in. Again, Andrew, thank you for coming back to campus, albeit virtually. It's great to have you, and I know I speak on behalf of everybody who's watching this in saying we're really thrilled to have you here. And the most important first question I have is, where did you live freshman year at Brown?
Well, thank you for making this happen, Tom, and thank you for your leadership. The DNC, I mean, it's a really important job. I mean, literally, I feel like civilization is going to be up for grabs this November, and you've been leading the efforts for months and months, trying to put us in position to win in the fall. I lived in New Pembroke number 4, which
wow.
I think it's still called that. Like, no one threw a name on that dorm, to my knowledge. I did hang out in Keeney Quad an awful lot because, you know, I had friends there, and it seemed like the place to be my freshman year. But I lived in New Pembroke number 4, ate in the V-Dub, and yeah, like there was a hot dog place called Spike's that, you know, when I went back, I think it was closed, but it used to be right by my dorm.
Well, you know, all these people today talk about all the proliferation of food trucks. I always say to them, you know, the Silver Truck was the original food truck in Providence, but I digress. And that was there when I was on campus.
I loved the Silver Truck. Anytime I saw that thing, I wanted to go get a hamburger, and often did.
So tell me about what was the difference between the Andrew Yang that entered Brown University and the Andrew Yang that graduated from Brown University? How did Brown transform you and prepare you for the remarkable work you've done as an adult?
I feel incredibly indebted to Brown because I feel like Brown allows you to discover who you are in many respects. You know, I went down different courses of study. I showed up wanting to be an English major, and then I took a couple of literature classes, and then turned towards economics and political science and American civilization. But I think the biggest growth experiences at Brown were, you know, I had my first real romantic relationship at Brown. I remember when I showed up, to Brown freshman year, they said there was some ridiculous chance that you're going to meet your future mate your freshman year, which put a lot of pressure at all of us. I don't know if they still tell you that when you show up to Brown, but it was something like, there's a 50% chance you're going to meet your future mate freshman year. So we're all looking at each other being like, really? So I had my first real love at Brown. And then when that relationship ended my junior year, that time actually is the time, strangely enough, where I feel most grateful to Brown, because I felt like going through that first real breakup was like an important progression to adulthood. And even though I was in, I wasn't exactly like as engaged as I had been academically before, it's like, there was still like a sense of community. I ended up studying abroad my junior year, spending a semester in Hong Kong. And so like that, there were a lot of personal experiences that I feel like formed me, but also intellectually. I don't know how many of you had classes with Professor Chait, but some of the classes I took, ethics and public policy, particularly city politics, he taught. And then I took a class called labor economics at Brown that also really influenced me very, very profoundly. So I'd say the classes, the people, just coming of age in an environment where it felt like you could be yourself.
And so you graduate from Brown. Tell us about your journey from young graduate to erstwhile presidential candidate who had a remarkable run over the course of about 18 months.
I was probably the last person at Brown that anyone thought was going to run for president. My main pursuits were the Taekwondo club, going to the gym, and playing video games. I mean, it's pretty normal stuff. Like, no one was like, ooh, that guy's going places. I don't think that was really the vibe I gave off. So I went from Brown to law school at Columbia, was an unhappy lawyer for 5 months, and just felt like that job was for the birds. I mean, it seemed like my job was to visualize the worst things that could happen, so I could protect some giant company from those things. And then they would pay you for, like dreaming up these negative scenarios and documenting them. So I left to start a business that flopped. But I'd been bitten by the startup bug and has worked at another startup that also flopped, honestly. And then another one that eventually did well. And so there was like 10 years of entrepreneurship. And I'm going to share that I think Brown has a very entrepreneurial DNA, where I talk to people. I know there are many, many folks here who might know someone in the Brown entrepreneurial community, but that was my path for the 10 years after Brown. Tom's like unhappy lawyer for 5 months, startup, and then eventually became head of an education company that did quite well. And at that point, actually, Brown re-enters the picture, because when I started Venture for America in 2012, Charlie Kroll, who was a Brown grad, helped me launch it. And then Brown University was the site of Venture for America for 6 years, from 2012 to 2017. So a lot of my memories of Providence are actually more recent than the 90s when I attended as an undergrad.
Wow. I often say to people, the two most important days of your life are the day you were born and the day you figure out why. Do you feel like Brown helped you with that latter question?
I think Brown's ethos of self-exploration really did help me. And you and I were talking a little bit about this before, but I ran Venture for America for 6-7 years. And so I met hundreds of graduates of different schools. And I think Brown is very distinct, where it has its own culture of self-exploration to a higher degree than a lot of the other peer institutions. So I was joking with you that Brown has to fix the world that Harvard broke, because at this point you have so many of our institutions that have gone off the rails. And a lot of entrepreneurship is about being someone who will actually try and solve problems or improve the world, or take your vision for something that's missing, whether it be a product or service or offering, and then trying to take it into the world and serve something other than just raw financial interests. I mean, the truth is our country has lost its way because everything revolves around money. And I feel like Brown did not have that message at all. Like, I talked to a classmate at Brown who I didn't know was from a wealthy family, but it turns out he was. But he told me that he was like, hey, I feel like at Brown, like, you're not allowed to talk about like anything like that. Like that if you were to ever like talk about money in that way, you'd be like a raging jerk. And he's like, I really appreciated that about Brown. And I didn't realize that that was like the experience that someone like him would have, but I appreciate it too. I think that's actually a lot of what's been missing.
You mentioned something that's a good segue to your presidential campaign. You know, that there's so many, our country has lost its way, I think is what you just said a minute or two ago, or to that effect. Tell us about your decision to run for president, and you know, what went into that. What did your wife say when you first told her, I'm thinking about running for president?
Yeah, she didn't take it that seriously at first. I mean, you know, we'd been married for a while, so she knows I'm entrepreneurial, but I think that one still sort of like was met with some skepticism here in the Yang household, let's say. So a lot of it was that I'd spent 6.5, 7 years running Venture for America, and I realized that the problems I was trying to solve were just so much bigger than my organization was going to be able to. Where if we created hundreds of jobs, even thousands, we're going to lose many times that in the economy because of progressing technologies and automation. And so it's a difficult thing to look up and say, my organization is not actually going to solve the problem. How would you solve the problem? There is no way to solve the problem realistically without rewriting the rules of the economy. How do you do that? And at that point, I'd already been exposed to some of the biggest foundations and philanthropies and venture capital firms, and none of them were actually doing work on the right scale. You know, it's like the same thing's happened to you, I'm sure, Tom, where you get like, I mean, you're at like the very tippy top of politics, a member of the cabinet, like, you know, leader of government, now the chair of the Democratic Party. It's like you get exposure to who people are, what they're working on, what the institutions are. And you also realize those institutions' limitations, like in a way that you don't if you're, you know, just looking up at them. And so I'd gotten enough exposure at Venture for America where I thought there was no way to realistically solve these problems without control of the government. And then I said, well, how do you take control of the government? Well, you run for president. And then it was like, well, what does it take to run for president? You have to be 35 years or older and, you know, natural born US citizen. I was like, check and check. And I was like, those are the only rules. All right. I guess, let me look into what else you need to do. So it was very much an entrepreneurial endeavor. Like it felt like a startup where you looked up and said, okay, I need to raise millions of dollars. How do you do that? I need to champion my ideas. How do you do that? I need to get press. How do you do that? And then you just keep trying to solve every problem every day in the hopes that you can have a positive impact. But my wife was not fully like believing that I was going to do this until I think I had left Venture for America. And then she was like, I guess you really are going to do this.
So, you know, if I were Las Vegas odds makers back in, say, February of 2019, when people started getting in the race, and we ended up with roughly 24 candidates who ultimately threw their hat in the ring, largest field on the Democratic side in history. Back in February, if you were laying odds on who's going to be on the debate stage for the debate before the New Hampshire primary, the first in the nation primary in early February, I don't think a lot of people would have laid a lot of odds on Andrew Yang still being on the debate stage for that debate. And fast forward, it was a Friday evening before the New Hampshire primary, and you had earned your way onto the debate stage. What do you think about I had the privilege of obviously spending a lot of time with you in all those debates, and what always struck me, Andrew, was the passion of your following. If you don't have a passionate following, you're always going to have challenges. And the team you assembled the voters and supporters you earned, they stuck with you, and it was truly remarkable. And now that you've had a little time to reflect back on it, why in this world where so many others certainly had more name ID than you at the start, what do you think happened?
No, I think, Tom, that it was the very unlikely nature of my campaign, where you start out and you're the anonymous Asian non-politician who wants to give everyone money. And people are like, well, that seems pretty far out. But then when people started digging into our vision for the country, they realized, wait a minute, this actually would really improve people's lives. And they saw that I was running as a human being, that I didn't have a political ladder to climb, that my goal was simply just to try and solve some of these problems that affect us all. And I'm just thrilled that so many Americans decided to support my campaign and donate. I mean, we had almost 500,000 donors, raised almost $40 million. Like my kids really liked the bus. I mean, the first time I showed up in New Hampshire was like I was just driving my used Subaru, and there was like one person at the event, and I was like, all right, like I guess this will go someplace. Like we'll just keep building from here. And then it culminated in this national campaign that really moved the needle on some of the major ideas. One of the polls, we ran internal polls, and the support for universal basic income in Iowa went from 27% when I started to 66% by the end. And that was a thrill. It was like, wow, if you really make the case, like you can actually get most people to support it. And that was before the pandemic. Like now with the pandemic, like we ran that poll again, I think it would be even higher.
Do you feel a level of vindication when you look at the stimulus bill and see $1,200 checks going to many taxpayers?
I'm just grateful that we managed to advance solutions that turns out the country needed right when the crisis hit. I mean, you remember, like we were there together that week in New Hampshire, like we suspended in February, and then we're implementing this stimulus in April. So I'm just grateful that so many of us were able to advance solutions that were immediately available to policymakers as soon as this crisis really shut our doors.
Are you surprised? Let me ask you about New Hampshire again, because I remember seeing you. We ran into each other. It was a Friday evening, and after the debate, by chance, I ran into you and your wife, and we had a very nice conversation for about 10 minutes or so. And I remember both watching you at the debate and then reflecting on that conversation. And I said to someone on my team, I just had a really good conversation with Andrew and family. And he appears to me to be in a really remarkable place, because he's left it all on the table. He has done remarkably well. I think he has a pretty good situational awareness that the New Hampshire primary for him is probably do or die in terms of the candidacy. And he's at peace with whatever the voters decide. That was kind of the impression I took away from that conversation we had. It was probably a Friday night around 10:30 or 11 o'clock after you had already had another debate. And tell us about the process of figuring out that it was perhaps time to suspend the campaign, because that has to be hard.
Yeah, I think your read on our conversation is very on point, where I felt very proud of the campaign, but I was also cognizant of the fact that we needed to have a really shocking, historic set of numbers in New Hampshire for us to have a viable path to the nomination. And if we didn't have a viable path, I was certainly not going to take people's money and support and end up probably at the margins decreasing our chances of winning in the fall, like if I were to persist the whole time. I also want to take this opportunity to say that it's not like Tom's the chair of the DNC is somehow like, twisting arms or pulling strings in terms of like these candidate decisions. It's like I really respect you, Tom, for doing a really difficult job where, it's like people will try and pick at any decision you make, because any decision you make is not going to make everyone happy, particularly if you have a field of like 24 or whatnot.
I think I angered everybody at some point during the primary process, not by design, but those things happen.
Yeah, no. So, and I always appreciated the fact that, you were principled and at arm's length. Like, it's not like you were breathing down anyone's neck to make decisions. You were just setting the rules of the road. So in New Hampshire, I knew that if we didn't have an outsized result, that the responsible thing to do would be to consider suspending. And that's the way it went, where we didn't have the result we wanted in New Hampshire. It was very hard. I saw team members in Nevada like the following day, and like people were crying. It is devastating for many, because in order for you to run and have any chance at having an impact, there are thousands and thousands of people who put their heart and soul into your campaign. We had people who dropped everything and moved to Iowa for weeks and months. We had people who dropped everything and volunteered in New Hampshire for weeks and months. We had people who really put their lives on hold. And so when you tell them that the campaign is ending without the result that you want, like, it's really devastating. And as a candidate, you're so grateful, and you want to comfort people. It's one reason why I started a new organization, Humanity Forward, so immediately afterwards, because I wanted to send the message, look, I'm not the Democratic nominee, but this is just getting started. Like, we're going to keep on fighting for the same vision of the country.
You may be out of the race, but you're not out of the fight. And that organization is a great example of it. I look at the field now, and we went from 24 down to a presumptive front runner, and you see the support. You have sent emails out on behalf of the DNC. Senator Sanders did last week. Senator Warren, all of the candidates have sent emails out. How do you? What suggestions do you have? I'm confident we have 600 or so listeners today, and then it'll go on live stream, and others may watch. And one thing I know, having been involved in campaigns where you dig your heart and soul into that candidate, is sometimes it's a little difficult. It takes a little time then to make the transition to whoever the nominee is. And what would you say to your supporters today, and to those who supported other candidates, about where we are and what they need to do moving forward?
The reality is that Donald Trump will be our president for another 4 years unless Joe Biden defeats him. And so if you are, like me, repelled by the idea of one more day under President Trump, we have to do everything in our power to help Joe win. And if Joe was not your candidate, maybe I was your candidate, maybe Bernie was your candidate, Elizabeth was your candidate, whoever it is, we all need to get behind Joe. And Bernie knows that, I know that, Elizabeth knows that, like everyone knows that. I understand, particularly among people who have very, very strong ideals, where you think like, oh, this is not the person that I originally wanted to support. But you have to realize that there are two options in reality: President Trump for another 4 years, or defeating him. And that means backing Joe. And I like Joe, like we get along famously. We need to win. Like I've said from day one, I will support the Democratic nominee, because we cannot take another day of Trump. It makes me so sad about how many lives have been upended and destroyed by this pandemic, that we really could have done a much better job of mitigating, preparing for developing capacity in the healthcare infrastructure, contact tracing people when they first came back. I was interviewed by Bloomberg, Tom, not Mike Bloomberg, but his organization, in late January in Iowa, and they asked me what I would do. And I said, we should be following people around when they get back, if they're coming from an infected area, and just make sure that if they show symptoms in those 2 weeks, like that we know about it and that we know who they were in contact with. And the journalists I was talking to looked at me like I was nuts. And I was like, look, like if this seems like alarmist, I mean, then we're in good shape, because that means that we managed to keep this pandemic from spreading. But that was late January. And then we just lost so much time. It's heartbreaking. It makes me so sad. You know, and like the effects of this virus are going to be felt for years. And I feel for the young people watching this, because you're coming of age in a really, really dark and challenging time. And step one of getting out of this is freaking Joe defeating Donald Trump in the fall.
Right. And I mean, I've had the privilege of a lifetime of working for the likes of Ted Kennedy and President Clinton and then President Obama and Vice President Biden. And I'll tell you, I had a front row seat to governance, Andrew. And when I needed help, when we were working to expand overtime wages for tens of millions of workers, my go-to person was Joe Biden. When we were working to make sure that people had the right to form a union, my go-to person was Joe Biden. When we were working to expand access to opportunity for our LGBTQ brothers and sisters, my go-to person was Joe Biden. And you know, one thing that this presidency under Trump is exposing is the importance of having leadership with character, leadership that understands it's not about them, it's about the people you're serving. Leadership that understands, Andrew, what you said before, which is that this economy just isn't working for so many tens of millions of people. And the role of leadership at the top, which is what I heard you say motivated you to run, is to transform that so that zip code doesn't determine opportunity, so that everyone can truly have a fair shake. So we have an economy that works for everyone, not just a few at the top. And I personally had that remarkable privilege of working with the vice president, and frankly, working with so many candidates, and then getting to know people like you. And what really inspires me right now is the unity of our candidates and the character of all of you. Because anyone who runs for something like president, and I've run for office before, you're in it to win it. And then when you have people who come behind you the way you did, it is hard to step out. But you and all of your colleagues who ran have understood that it's bigger than you. This is a moral fork in the road in our democracy, and that is the moment in time we find ourselves in. And so I want to turn to questions now from students, and I'm going to turn this over to Ed. But I want to, before we do that, simply thank you. I think you are the best spirit of Brown University. And
that's so kind,
everything
Tom. I mean,
everything you stood for. My son, who's 17 years old, Andrew, he has so many friends who are Yang gangers, and will always be. And this was their first foray into politics, and you were the first person who inspired them. That's a hell of a legacy, and that's a legacy that will truly endure.
Oh, that's so kind. You know, I need to thank your son, and but thank you, Tom. I mean, you've had a really, again, tough job, and I agree with you that the candidates, if you're doing it for the right reasons, it's just it's an act of service, and it's not about you. You know, like we just have to try and move the country in the right direction, and I know like Joe has to lead us in a better direction.
Great. So Ed, we'll turn it to you, and there are questions for Andrew or myself.
Super. Thanks to you both for getting us off. And it's just such an inspiring start. So let's turn to the students. I'm going to ask Lena Renshaw to ask the first question. So Lena, why don't you jump on aboard and go ahead.
Hi. Thank you so much, Andrew Yang, for coming. It's really amazing to get to hear from you. I have a question about your Washington Post article that you wrote recently. There's a quote that says, "We as Asian Americans need to embrace and show our Americanness in ways we have never done before. We need to step up, help our neighbors, donate gear, vote, where red, white, and blue volunteer, fund aid organizations, and do everything in our power to accelerate the end of the crisis. We would show without a shadow of a doubt that we are Americans who will do our part for our country in this time of need. My question to you is, doesn't this imply that Asian Americans and minorities in America generally are not American enough unless they actively embrace their so-called Americanism? Why do you believe that minorities in America must constantly prove to white folks that they are worthy of being in our country and worthy of being American? In our current pandemic, where Asian Americans especially are facing extreme xenophobia, including from our current president, do you believe that Asian Americans stepping up will actually make a difference regarding these prejudices? Or is it fair to say that your statement unfairly demands more of Asian Americans simply because they are Asian?
Thanks for the question, Lena. Of course, Asian Americans are as American as anyone else. And my message is that we all need to do more, whether that's Asian Americans, like everyone just needs to help. And that's the message that the op-ed was pushing, was that, look, we're already being victimized by this virus in the same way that every other American is. Like, we're all trapped in our homes, concerned about, like our family's futures. And then in our case, it's unfortunately compounded by this spike in racism and hostility towards us. And so the question is, how do you respond? Do you respond with fear, or do you respond by saying, look, I have to do everything I can to help, whether that's, the courage of our healthcare workers on the front lines. And the op-ed said Asian Americans happen to be disproportionately represented in healthcare fields, where 17% of doctors, despite being only 5% of the population. But the message is really that we all just need to help out. And that's something that I think is true for all Americans.
Okay, great. Thanks. Let's go to a question from James Salembian. But forgive me, folks, if I mispronounce your names. James, do you want to come on board?
There you go.
Hi there. First of all, thank you so much for organizing this panel, and thank you, Andrew, for joining us. My question to you is, how can we avoid a repeat of the Wisconsin debacle on Election Day in November? What are some measures we can implement to protect voters from fraud and ensure their opinions are valued as they should be?
James, is this a question for Tom?
I'm happy to
Tom,
jump
fire away.
too, Andrew. I mean, what happened in Wisconsin was unconscionable. I had the privilege in the Civil Rights Division of taking on states that had pernicious voter ID laws, voter purges, other activities and actions that were designed, frankly, to make it harder for African Americans and Latinos and Asian Americans and Native Americans to vote. This in Wisconsin, what happened took it to a new level, where they were willing to force you to put your life at risk to exercise your right to vote. And already there are reports that 7 people who voted on Election Day in person or worked at polls have tested positive. So Election Day participation related coronavirus. The Republicans knew that, and they deliberately suppressed the vote on Election Day. They deliberately forced that election in order to suppress the vote so they could win a very important state Supreme Court race. It backfired wildly, and they lost that race. They got their butt kicked in that race. And what it shows us moving forward is that voter suppression on steroids is going to be the playbook. Now, let's talk a moment about vote by mail. What we know about vote by mail, because it has been studied and studied and studied, is this fraud argument is a sham, plain and simply. March the 10th, the epicenter or an epicenter of COVID-19 was Washington State. They put on a primary that had 8 or 9-fold increase in turnout from 2016. How did they do that? Vote by mail. That's what they did. And so what we're doing now, James, and it's good to see you again, parenthetically, is what we are doing now is a number of things. We are working with leaders in the House and the Senate. And by the way, there are a few Republican governors who understand that vote by mail can work. Ohio, New Hampshire, Iowa, they've said this. The president has been very candid in saying, well, vote by mail, Republicans don't do so hot. well, like, what are you scared about having more people vote? And so we're working with the leadership to ensure that the next round of stimulus contains resources for states so that they can provide vote by mail as an option. I'm not talking about supplanting in-person voting. I'm talking about augmenting in-person voting with more early voting, with no excuse absentee voting, and with vote by mail. That's what we're doing. We're also filing lawsuits, filed another lawsuit today. We've been filing a host of lawsuits so that people don't have to make the unconscionable choice between their safety and their sacred right to vote. I know this is going to continue to happen because we've seen voter suppression for years and years. It's been a full employment act for lawyers on our side. And I frankly fear that Wisconsin is the playbook that some Republicans are going to use moving forward. It really is shameful. And we're going to fight like heck to make sure that we have the most robust voter protection infrastructure ever. And it's not just we, the DNC. We're working with many, many partners in the ecosystem. Eric Holder leads a group. Stacey Abrams leads a group. We're working together.
So Tom, you're optimistic that because I like James's question really is something that like we're all thinking about is like, oh my gosh, like what does this election look like? You're optimistic that we'll have vote by mail in a lot of these precincts?
Well, we're going to try like heck, and we will use both litigation and hopefully the resources that we have and will get in the stimulus bills to do that. But again, the thing we have to understand is the way people vote differs from state to state. And in certain states where Republicans have control, in some states they have moved to vote by mail. So we should give credit where credit is due. But we have a president who has said, oh, vote by mail hurts Republicans. You look at what the Republicans in Wisconsin did. That was unconscionable. And frankly, you shouldn't have to win the geographic lottery to be able to exercise your right to vote. So I hope every state moving forward.
I mean, I agree with you. It's unconscionable. It's unconscionable what happened in Wisconsin. Like, you know, it's like you can't have a stay-at-home order and then have an election the same day. I mean, that's you know, that's not feasible.
Great. Thanks so much for that question, James. Let's go now to a question from Claire Costa. Claire, the stage is yours.
Thank you. My question is for Andrew Yang. So in the wake of stimulus packages being implemented in countries across the world, the question of universal basic income has become widely discussed, with many countries implementing what is essentially a temporary one. Do you see a path for implementing something like this in the US, or using this unfortunate situation to transfer something like a freedom dividend?
Thanks for the question, Claire. I just saw a poll that said the vast majority of Americans in both parties now support a universal basic income for the duration of the crisis, and in some cases in perpetuity. So this idea is going to be front and center and here to stay, in part because the brutal truth is that of the tens of millions of jobs that have evaporated, many of them are not returning. I hear from big company CEOs who are saying that they're already looking at shrinking their workforces, automating processes, having smaller offices. Like that's happening in companies throughout the country right now. So universal basic income is going to be front and center because it's one of the only practical things we can do to give more Americans a secure path forward. The level of displacement and devastation with this crisis, it's unprecedented in our lifetimes, and it's going to be persistent. You know, I mean, Tom was the former Secretary of Labor, so he knows like these dynamics as well as anyone. But you know, I wish I had a better outlook, but I know what's going on in these C-suites. You know, like I know that of the 130,000 furloughed Macy's employees, they're planning on bringing like, you know, like a fraction of them back. And there are limited tools available to us as a society. Universal basic income to me is the most effective tool available. And guess what? Tens of millions of Americans just got $1,200 in their bank account. And I have a feeling that they liked it. I have a feeling that they saw like, hey, this actually really helps me and my family. It doesn't transform my personality. It doesn't make my neighbor like a layabout. So a lot of the counter arguments are going to be really difficult to muster, and universal basic income is going to become very, very popular. You probably saw also, Claire, that like Spain's implementing a version The Pope said something very positive about a universal basic wage. So this isn't just us, it's going to be everywhere.
Claire, if I can mention one thing there, you talked about this conversation happening around the world. In the midst of this pandemic, there was only one country that had to have a conversation about paid leave, and that was the United States. Everywhere else in the world is ahead of us. We're the only, I think, actually, might be us in Papua New Guinea. Although Papua New Guinea, someone from Papua New Guinea told me that they're working on it. So
yeah, they just passed it. I think we might be alone in a minute, Tom.
So I think that we're now alone. So stop dissing Papua New Guinea, he told me. And it's really shameful. And this pandemic exposed an element of what's lacking in our social compact that we must fix. I've spent a ton of time on this with the Vice President and with President Obama when I was Labor Secretary. And I don't understand it. And by the way, you talk to companies with a global footprint, and I have. And they've managed to make money and provide this in every other country where they have a footprint, and here they don't, and that is shameful. And I hope one thing that will come out of this is the realization that this is a very, very important thing that we need to work on.
Great, thanks so much, Claire. Let's turn now to a question from Daniel Chan. Daniel, are you ready?
Oh, yeah. Okay. Hi, Andrew. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. I wanted to ask a question regarding the role of the Asian American electorate and its relationship with the Democratic Party. So Asian Americans are the fastest growing minority group in the country, with 20 million and counting. The majority of Asian Americans vote blue, but there's an increasing sentiment among Asian Americans the Democratic Party has left them behind. I see this occur regularly within my own community, with Democratic candidates regularly appealing to African American and Latino voters while rarely addressing the concerns of Asian American voters. How can the Democratic leadership change this current political neglect of Asian Americans when it's a community that faces an increasing number of social issues such as lack of representation, racial discrimination, and large socioeconomic disparities? Thank you.
Thanks, Daniel. I appreciate the question so much. And one of the reasons I ran was because I hoped that we could change what you just described. Because the Asian American community is the fastest growing ethnic community in the country. And we are something of a political afterthought for a number of structural reasons that I hope that we can change. Some of them, so one of the jokes I used to tell was that one of the problems is that we live in either very blue or very red states. So if you're in New York or California, it's like, well, you're not going to swing like, Ohio or Michigan. And so I used to joke with Asian Americans that what we all need to do is move to New Hampshire. And then all of a sudden we would become a very, very powerful like voting bloc. Now that was obviously not very serious, but one of the things that we can do as a community is we need to vote at higher levels. We vote less than other groups. We need to run for office at higher levels. We need to donate at higher levels. There's like a bilateral relationship where if we become more politically engaged, then the Democratic Party will pay more attention to us and listen to us more. The last number I saw was that 75% of Asian Americans vote Democrat now, which was higher than I thought. I actually thought it was like closer to 55-45 or 60-40, but Asian Americans have been moving towards the Democrats more and more recently, I think in part because of Trump and this version of the Republican Party. And so I agree with you that politicians and Democratic leadership should be paying more attention to Asian Americans. I hope I can help with that. I know Tom would be a passionate advocate for that. And then on the other side, Asian Americans need to get out and vote. We need to actually participate in these political processes at the same level as other groups. Because if you look at it, Daniel, like, do Democratic politicians pay much more attention to African American voters than Asian American voters, even if you account for the numerical difference? Yes. Do African Americans vote at much higher levels than we do, particularly in certain areas? Yeah, they do. So there's actually like a real relationship there that we need to work on. And I hope that my candidacy helped activate Asian Americans to feel like politics is for us. because certainly growing up as the son of immigrants, I did not get the message that politics was for us. My parents were certainly not being like, you're going to run for president someday. Like those were not the conversations in our household. You could probably relate a lot. Like if you're, if you were in a similar household. So that's something I hope to change. One of the reasons I ran was I thought, Tom, I could make that debate stage, and I thought having an Asian American on the debate stage would be helpful. I was very happy that I made 7, and so I got to do it over and over again. But the hope was that would actually raise the sights and sensibilities of Asian Americans around the country to say, wait a minute, we can run for president. Yes. We can run for city council. We can run for school board. We can run for Congress. We can do all of those things. So yeah, let's work on it. But I agree with you. It's a problem.
Just to give you a historical benchmark, Daniel, when George Herbert Walker Bush ran for president in that would have been 88. It was either 88 or 92. I don't know if I forgot what cycle. Roughly, and Perot was on the ballot. Roughly 2/3 of Asian American voters voted for either Bush or Perot. Now you look, and Andrew's just cited what the data is now. There's been a dramatic movement and a bigger denominator and getting even bigger. And what we know, and I know we know at the DNC, and I've had this conversation with Vice President Biden, we know we have to earn every vote. In order to earn every vote, we've got to lead with our values. I led the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department, and civil rights is about making sure everybody's got a seat at the table. So, I think as you watch the months ahead, and I know Andrew is going to be a really, really important surrogate moving forward to make sure not just go vote because we're Democrats, but go vote because we have your back and we're fighting for the things that matter most to you. And by the way, we can stay till 5:15. I know this was supposed to end at 5, but I have a feeling, I'm looking at the queue of questions, and we can both last another 15 minutes.
Fantastic.
I hate to say this, Daniel, but I think that the coronavirus-based racism against Asian Americans may actually increase our political engagement. Because there's a sense that it's like, wow, we have to get out there and participate in our political races, or else we're going to end up with a president who ends up characterizing the coronavirus as the China virus, and that now has direct impacts on us and our communities every single day. Like there are many Asian Americans who are like, hey, this stuff doesn't matter. And then now everyone's like, oh my gosh, this does matter, because people are now more hostile. Like they're not patronizing our businesses. Like this now is going to become existential. And obviously like no one wants this for our community, but I do think it's going to potentially make politics seem more relevant in the darkest of ways.
Great, super. And thanks, Daniel, for your question. And I'm going to ask Noah Klein to ask the next question. And to those of you in the audience, I know there are many questions coming in on the Q&A part of the webinar. And so I'm going to start turning to those soon and repeating them. So excellent. Noah, why don't you go ahead and ask your question?
Thanks again, Andrew, for speaking with us today. This pandemic likely means the Democratic nominee isn't going to be able to utilize traditional methods of campaigning, like rallies and town halls. Your campaign was incredibly successful at using social media to connect with people across the country. So I'm wondering how you think the nominee is going to have to alter strategy to both reach people from a distance and overcome Trump's advantage as an incumbent.
Yeah, I know that many people on our side are looking at this. And the funny thing is, too, it's like, I think my campaign was very, very internet savvy. But, like my campaign lost to Joe's campaign. you know what I mean? So that there are certain segments of the population that I think that we do need to do a much better job reaching out to, including young people who aren't watching cable news regularly and are just getting their news from social media feeds and the rest of it. And Joe's campaign has not been a leader in those realms, certainly to the extent that I and my campaign and my supporters can help. On that front, we're going to do what we can to help. So it's a problem. Joe is disadvantaged by the fact that we can't utilize traditional campaigning, because it's hard to compete with that visual of like the, you know, press conference and the White House briefing room and the rest of it. And you don't have the ability to hold a rally. So we're going to have to be inventive. Like some of Joe's recent ads that frankly like show old footage of us in rallies. I mean, that was that like, it's like, oh yeah, you know, you could still use those visuals. I am optimistic though, Noah, that the fact is this is going to be a binary choice down the stretch where, you know, it's like we're trapped in our homes. I think there are many people that are going to see Trump's handling of this pandemic and say like, this was unacceptable. Like this was not something I want to vote for again. So I think there are very, very big factors at play. But I agree with you that to the extent we can help energize the Democratic electorate through new media and the internet, like we have to do everything we can. Certainly I'm going to be heading in that direction. So I'm going to be on Joe's podcast next week in part to try and be helpful. And then, you know, we'll be having virtual events. I'm launching a podcast myself next week, and I think Joe's actually supposed to come on. So we're going to do everything we can to help.
And Noah, it's a great question. And the job of the party is to build infrastructure and build trust. And over the last 3 years, we've been working at both. And building trust, I would note, is a timeless journey. And one thing I'm very proud of is we're in the middle of handing over a very robust data and technology and digital organizing infrastructure to the vice president and to his campaign. Just in the last month, for instance, we've trained 7,000 digital organizers. We already have in the field in battleground states, you know, far more infrastructure than existed 4 years ago. And these folks, they're not knocking doors now, but they've all got their virtual clipboards in hand. And, you know, people wondered, how the heck did you win in Wisconsin when they forced you to vote in the middle of a pandemic? The answer was digital organizing. We out-hustled them. We produced a record number of folks who voted absentee. And that's exactly what we're doing now in the upcoming primary states. And that's exactly what the vice president is beginning to do as well. And so, and we have an initiative called Organizing Corps, 1,200 organizers in 8 key battleground states. The average age is about 21, 22. It's you and your colleagues and your peers. And what you all have in common is a digital fluency that far surpasses my own, and is going to be, I think, a real asset moving forward. So I think there's an acute awareness that we need to keep doing this. And so many young people, the opportunity it gives to your generation is you are the difference makers in producing the persuasion tools that will enable us to get across the finish line.
You hear that, Noah? Tom Perez says, make some memes, make some Biden memes. Everyone watching this.
Great. Noah, thanks a lot for your question. And now let's welcome in Peter Deegan. Peter, you all set?
Yes. I think that worked. My question is, how did your campaign experience change you as a person? How is Andrew at time 2 different than Andrew at time 1? Has politics made you a better person, or is it corrupting?
Thanks for the question, Peter. I can very clearly see how politics ends up changing you in ways that make you more controlled and almost inhumanly monotonous. Because what happens is anytime you go off the rails and you say something that is off color or whatnot, like there's like a firestorm of criticism. And then everyone on your team is like, hey, don't do that again. And then if you're a politician, you're like, okay, I guess I shouldn't do that again, whatever that was. And then after you get burnt a couple times that way, then your behavior starts becoming more confined. And then when someone sticks a camera in your face or a microphone, then you go to your handful of talking points, and that's it. And so you become something of a robot. So that's the nature of politics generally. And a lot of it is because you're employing professionals who are around you, and a lot of the time their edict is to do no harm. And it's do no harm because you're running a campaign that has, you know, millions of dollars and blah, 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 but also because it's their job as professionals and they want to go on to another job after you, you know, like they don't want to be responsible for the candidate who like, you know, did that thing that everyone, you know, recognizes as negative. So I was in a different spot, Peter, because if I allowed the guardrails to close in, then I was going to be completely ignored and be a total dud and nothing would matter. So for me, like I was leaning into my humanity. Like I would do things that, you know, I think frankly, like other presidential candidates wouldn't, because they were quote unquote more serious than I was. And so like I could push the envelope. If I wasn't pushing the envelope, no one here would have heard of Andrew Yang ever. And we wouldn't be having this conversation. So like I had no, and the great thing for me was like, what are my stakes? Like I didn't have a political downside to protect. Like I was just trying to eradicate poverty and advance like a vision for the country. So I'm happy to say that I believe I actually became like a better person through the process, because you're leading a campaign or a movement of hundreds of thousands of Americans, and it's so touching. And then you go to New Hampshire, Iowa, and you talk to people who lost their health care, lost their relatives to drug addiction, came back from the war, and have been struggling ever since. It's heartbreaking. Like, you know, you just get exposed to so much humanity on both sides, the love and idealism of the people that are supporting you, and then the pain and suffering of people that are trying to search for a better path. And in like I got stretched in really profound ways. I mean, I missed my family terribly. And, you know, I have 2 young kids, and I was on the road for like the better part of 2 years. And when you're in like the Best Western in the winter in Iowa or Michigan, and you're like looking around, like, you know, you're FaceTiming your wife who's like handling your kids and is like busy with them. You know, you look up and it's really difficult a lot of the time. So the fact that this campaign, I feel like actually paid dividends for our country, is something I'm like incredibly grateful for, incredibly proud of. The fact that I used to joke that I have like 2 goals, like 1, abolish poverty, and 2, stay married. You know, and I'm happy to say, like, you know, I accomplished the second goal, and it looks like the first goal might be on its way. But I can very, very easily see how politics will not make you a better person. It will confine your behaviors. It will expose you to institutional incentives. It exposes you to a professional class that just wants to be able to be there for candidate after candidate. And it also makes you a bit of a mercenary because you have to dial for dollars all the time. And this is another thing I was very grateful for, is that I never really had to dial for dollars, because I had hundreds of thousands of Americans who just like invested $10, $20, $25 in my campaign. And I was so grateful for that, because I hate calling people for money. It is dehumanizing. It's miserable. Even if they say yes, they make you do this entire kabuki song and dance, and you have to keep a smile on your face the entire time. Like, you know, I know Tom agrees with this. If we can actually institute campaign finance reform, it would make our leaders better people, because then they wouldn't have to do that, like, you know, that mercenary kabuki, like where you like prostrate yourself. It's one reason why our government has been a servant to the giant companies, is because you literally have a leadership class that is just accustomed to just like, you know, sticking their hands up and being like, please give me the dribs and drabs of your vast wealth. And guess what? I'm not going to change a damn thing. You know, like that's really what has gone on. So like, I'm just so grateful for the fact that I got to keep my integrity. And it was because I had support, but it was also because, frankly, like, I didn't care about the outcome in that way. It's like, you know, like I didn't care about my political future, and that enabled me to do things, I think, in a different way.
Super. Thanks so much for your question, Peter. There's actually, and also let me thank both Andrew and Tom for your willingness to go a little bit over. I'm going to take that opportunity to read a few questions that have been coming in as you've been speaking. This question, Andrew, relates, I think, a little bit to the previous one and to your answer about resisting these pressures to become robotic. Hank Holtman asks, As someone who identifies as conservative, I found your campaign inspiring so much that I was set to vote for you if you were the Democratic nominee. Why do you think you're able to bring people of different views together? And how do you think politicians, both Democratic and Republican, can emulate your ability to bring people together?
Well, thank you so much. It means a lot. I used to tell people who are conservatives that their vote counts twice because, you know, if they defect from Trump, that's like, you know, one in our column and then, you know, -1 over there. I'm thrilled that you were considering supporting me. To me, I was talking about problems in an objective, data-driven way. And to me, the facts like don't care about your political ideology. You know, I think that's one reason why people of different politics supported me. Like when I go around saying, hey, guess what? Trucks are going to drive themselves at some point in the next number of years. There are 3.5 million truck drivers and 7 million Americans who work at truck stops, motels, and diners that rely upon the truckers getting out every day. What are we going to do? And that's not an ideological argument. That's just like, hey, like that's where it's heading. So we need to make adjustments. One of the things that I got frustrated with is that politics, it becomes like a war of words and symbols. And you literally have consultants saying, use this word, it'll like activate this group of voters, or will send this message. And then you have people brandishing like various symbols. And I didn't know how to do that because, you know, I was a non-politician. So I just came in and was like, hey, like, here's what I'm worried about. Here's what I would do about it. And let's try and move the country in a better direction. And that lack of schooling, I think, ended up making me appealing to people who traditionally would not have supported a Democrat. I hope that other politicians do the same sort of thing, because I'm convinced that there's a vast set of American voters who have completely tuned out politics because they just see it as like this rhetorical war that doesn't actually engage with the problems that they're seeing and feeling every day.
You know, when I look at Andrew Yang and I look at Doug Jones, who's a senator from Alabama, who we helped win, you know, the connective tissue there in them and so many other people is authenticity. I mean, there's not a phony bone in their body. And what we've seen, and if you look at people who've won elections, and I look at a lot of the new members that I've met in the U.S. House of Representatives, there's a woman named Lauren Underwood who represents Naperville, Illinois, and she is a person with pre-existing condition, worked in the healthcare sector, and won a remarkable victory in a swing district. So your questioner, you know, that she had to persuade a lot of folks who were registered Republicans who voted for Republicans for years. And I really believe her authenticity was a huge part of it. And I think there are so many shared values. You know, I remind people often that the day before Ronald Reagan left office, and I know people may wonder, why is Tom Perez, chair of the party, talking about Ronald Reagan? Well, the day before he left office, his last day in office, January 19, 1989, what was his last speech in the Oval Office about? His last speech in the Oval Office was about immigrants and immigration and how immigrants have made America so great. And immigration was one of those issues that brought Republicans and Democrats together. When I worked for Senator Kennedy in '96, I worked on the Judiciary Committee when they debated and passed comprehensive immigration reform. Was it a perfect bill? No. But did it help millions of people? Absolutely. And we had about 85 amendments in the committee. And I needed one hand to count the number of party line votes because there was a set of shared values. And I think people are really on the lookout for folks with authenticity, folks with common decency, folks that they can look at their children and say, I want you to emulate that person because that person, you may not agree with everything that's coming out of her mouth or his mouth, but that person is speaking authentically, is not making stuff up, and truly seems to have at his or her root the best interest of ordinary folks at heart. And I think that's part of the why did Andrew Yang make it all the way to New Hampshire when no one knew who the hell he was other than his family 18 months earlier? And it was a lot of what he did and how he inspired people. How did Doug Jones win a race? Doug Jones won a lot of Republican support in Alabama because he was speaking to those shared values that I think exist in every state in this country. And that's what we're trying to summon.
Andrew, in your response just now, you mentioned automation, and not surprisingly, there were a number of questions that have come in as you're speaking about automation. I'm going to combine a few of those questions. Peter Alani had asked, also Omri Bergner Phillips had both asked about this topic. And Peter mentioned that the current pandemic and all of this work from home may be suggesting or showing companies that they can shed more workers than they had even imagined. And maybe automation is going to speed up. And related to that, Omri asks, well, what jobs do you think college graduates today should seek to spread and generate wealth for normal Americans in this whole atmosphere of rapid automation?
That is the question. And like it or not, the government is going to be the central driver of how we distribute the wealth of our society to people that are going to be automated away and left behind, which is going to be more and more of us. I was already concerned about the fact that you are going to have fewer opportunities for people with high school educations or relatively low skill levels, and people who are at the top of the educational ladder. I mean, the fact is, a lot of the basic legal work that someone like me used to do, 20 years ago, now is being done by AI and software. So if you are genuinely concerned about getting opportunities to a broad number of Americans, it's going to be politics, it's going to be policy, it's going to be universal basic income, it's going to be the government. Because the bar for organizations to hire you is just going to rise and rise, especially in an environment where they're trying to do more with less.
Great, thanks. I want to go to a question now from another student, from Zachary Harris-Grosky. And Zachary asks, climate change consistently ranks as one of the issues that young people in America are most concerned about. However, young people also vote consistently less than older people. Do you believe that the Democratic Party should take a more progressive, outspoken stance on climate change in order to mobilize young voters? How can this be done?
I couldn't agree more that climate change is the problem. I'm not sure if the language a candidate uses around climate change will activate and energize more young voters, but if that is what it would take, then 100%, like, we should be doing it, because this is all of these problems are converging on us at the same time, unfortunately. It's climate change, the transformation of our economy, this pandemic, the government dysfunction that is has made us less and less able to take care of our people. But climate change should be the major issue, in part because we can actually build more opportunities around it. Like, if we were doing things correctly, we would be creating hundreds of thousands, millions of jobs, renewing our infrastructure, making our environment more sustainable, installing solar panels on like every school, every building, every dwelling. So that, to me, is the answer. Like, we should be going much, much harder after climate change.
I couldn't agree more. And the last point that Andrew made was going to be one of the first points that I made, which is that this is a win-win set of opportunities. I think we could produce a remarkable infrastructure bill that would put millions of people to work. There are certain jobs you can't outsource. And I agree with everything Andrew said about automation. We have a real problem, but there are a number of jobs that are good middle-class jobs that you can't outsource. And there are so many ways. And when I was labor secretary in Maryland during the Great Recession, we tried to use the Great Recession as an opportunity to create green jobs. And frankly, we didn't create enough of them. And so we've got to go to school on the lessons of some of the things we did with Recovery Act dollars as well. But I think there is a plethora of opportunity here. And I was really heartened, I think yesterday or the day before, the League of Conservation Voters Action Fund endorsed Vice President Biden. And one of the most frequent topics we've had in my study groups at Watson has been climate change. I had Gina McCarthy, former EPA administrator, speak to the class because when I speak to my kids, this is the issue of our time. My daughter yesterday was telling me that one of the silver linings, and you search for silver linings in chaotic moments like now, is that there have been a lot of reports because people aren't driving. Factories are closed.
We're polluting less.
We're polluting less. But we recognize that is a temporary thing unless we really move forward. And this gets back to something Andrew said earlier. I mean, the differences here are night and day between these two candidates. I mean, one believes in science and one doesn't. And it really starts there. And one of the real challenges that we don't discuss enough is that one of the most harmful legacy aspects of this president is the brain drain from key federal agencies. I know so many people who have just put their hands up and said, I can't deal with this guy anymore, I'm leaving. We saw that in the Bush administration because when I came in, we had to address that in the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department. And we're seeing that at scale. I've spoken to Gina McCarthy about the brain drain at EPA. We need to do so much, so fast when this vice president wins. And we won't have the luxury of time. And one thing that all of the people in my study groups have really hammered and so effectively is that we have to have a fierce urgency of now around this issue because our lives truly depend on it, and our economy long term, I believe, depends on it. And there are opportunities to have remarkable solutions.
I know there's also the brain drain globally. We used to be winning the global war for talent, and now there are many, many people that now don't think they need to come to the United States to build a business, build a career, build a life.
I know we just have one more minute before you both have to go. So I'm gonna push together a bunch of questions which basically ask this of you, Andrew. What's next for Andrew Yang? Another campaign?
I'm going to run for office again at some point. So I don't think that's surprising to anyone. We're going to, and I have to say, I joke with people. It's like, oh, it should be better the second time around because now I'm something of a known figure. But right around the corner for me, we're launching an anti-racism campaign on Monday with Dave Chappelle, John Leguizamo, Sophie Bush, Alyssa Milano, a bunch of other people to just say, look, this virus is not, the virus doesn't know race, and we need to come together and not let it divide us. So that's just next week. I'm part of Project 100, trying to distribute 100 million to 100,000 families right now. My organization has distributed 1.4 million itself, helping Joe win. I'm launching a podcast next week. I'm writing a book about the future. So I'm just doing everything I can to help. And what I want to say to you all is that I firmly believe that Brown University produces good people. And what we need more than anything else right now is good people in leadership, in service, in fields that are going to help move our country in a better direction. I don't know if you know, because it seems like most of you are still at Brown. I don't know if you know how special a place Brown is and the culture it has and the people it produces. But you all are seriously the shining light in terms of the future hope for the country. That's why I'm here. That's why I'm thrilled to be here. That's why I'm proud to be a Brown alum. And, just even from the brief glimpses I got of many of you, it's like, I'm going to give you the highest compliment. You all looked like Brown students to me. You sounded like Brown students. You seem like people that are going to make the world a better place. So just want to say thank you to Tom for having me, for Ed for moderating. And, we owe you better. We have left the next generation an awful mess. I know Tom and I are fighting like mad to try and do what we can to leave you a better country and world. But it's going to be your country and your world before you know it. And I know you're up for the challenge. So thank you all so much. And I wish we could do this in person, but maybe next time, maybe we'll reconvene.
We will reconvene.
Thank
You know,
you.
you both
Thank-
ended by talking about silver linings in cloudy, dark times. And I want to emphasize that in two ways. First, I want to thank the audience, all the students who, despite all the hardships you're facing and dislocation, you are active and you're participating and you're just enlightening us with your wisdom. And then second, I really want to thank both you, Andrew, and you, Tom, for demonstrating your civicness and your dedication to the country and your dedication, frankly, to education at Brown. We really appreciate it. I appreciate it. And I look forward to doing more of these kinds of events. Thank you all.
Thank you, Ed. And take risks. Don't
Thank you, Tom.
hesitate.
We'll be back next week. Just kidding. the weekly Yang Perez lecture, Perez Yang lecture. No, I'm just kidding.
You know, the most
Thanks.
important thing, the reason I wanted you to hear from Andrew Yang is you all have a remarkable credential you're about to get and a moral and ethical foundation that it gives you. And don't ever hesitate in life to take risk. Don't jump off a 20-story building without a parachute. That's called stupidity. But Andrew took a remarkable leap in running for president. And it is an inspiring leap that he has taken. And what I learned at Brown was there's no such thing as failure. The only failure is the failure to swing the bat. So get up there, get out there and swing the bat and swing it hard. That's my advice to all of you.
Awesome. Thanks. We'll see you soon.
Take care.